That morning began like every other quiet morning in the house I'd lived in for 37 years, and I remember sitting peacefully at my kitchen table with a warm cup of coffee in my hands while the soft sunlight slowly filled the room. The garden outside my window looked calm and beautiful as the roses moved gently in the light breeze, and for a moment everything about my life felt stable and familiar in a way that only a long-loved home can provide. I had already watered the plants, washed the dishes, and settled into the peaceful routine that had become part of my life after growing older and spending more time alone in the house. That kitchen table held decades of memories, including the years when my son Jason used to sit across from me doing his homework while asking for help with problems he could not solve. I could still picture his messy hair and frustrated expression when math confused him, and I remembered the way he used to look at me as if I had all the answers in the world. Back then he trusted me completely, the way only a child can trust the person who raised him and protected him through every difficult moment of life. I spent many years working long hours just to keep this house and give him a safe place to grow up after his father passed away. Every corner of the house carried pieces of our shared history, from birthday celebrations to quiet evenings spent talking about his dreams for the future. I never once imagined that the same child who once depended on me for everything would one day walk through my kitchen door carrying a decision that would completely change my life. But that peaceful morning ended the moment I heard the front door open and realized that Jason had arrived with something heavy on his mind. Jason walked into the kitchen slowly, and the first thing I noticed was the serious expression on his face that immediately made the room feel different. Behind him stood his wife Danielle, who remained quiet while watching me with a polite smile that somehow felt distant and rehearsed. They did not sit down like they normally did when visiting, and instead Jason stayed near the doorway as if he was preparing himself to say something difficult. I tried to welcome them the way I always did, by offering coffee and asking how their morning had been. Neither of them answered my simple question right away, and the silence that followed felt uncomfortable in a way that was hard to explain. Jason cleared his throat in a small, nervous sound that I remembered clearly from his childhood. It was the same sound he used to make whenever he had done something wrong and needed to confess it to me. Danielle placed a gentle hand on his arm, almost as if she was encouraging him to continue with something they had already discussed together. For a moment, I realized they were both looking at me carefully, almost like people studying a fragile object that might break. That strange tension in the room made me feel uneasy even before Jason finally spoke. When he finally looked directly at me, his eyes carried a seriousness that told me the conversation ahead would not be simple. "Mom, we've been worried about you lately," he said slowly, choosing his words with careful attention, as if he had practiced this sentence before walking into the house. At first, I simply looked at him with confusion because there was nothing in my life that seemed especially worrying to me. I asked him what exactly he meant, hoping he would explain something reasonable that I had misunderstood. Danielle answered before he could respond and explained that they had noticed a few small things that made them concerned about my safety. Jason mentioned that I'd forgotten to pay the electricity bill the previous month, and he spoke about it as if it were a serious warning sign. I calmly reminded him that I had paid the bill 2 days later and that everyone forgets small things occasionally. Danielle then added that I had stumbled in the garden while watering the plants the week before. I explained that I had tripped over the hose lying across the walkway, which could happen to anyone regardless of their age. They exchanged a quiet glance that suggested my explanations were not changing their opinion. That moment made me realize they had probably already decided what those small incidents meant long before arriving at my house. Jason finally took a deep breath and explained that they believed it might be better if I stayed somewhere else for a little while, where people could check on me regularly. For a moment, I did not fully understand what he meant because the idea sounded so distant from the life I was living. Danielle quickly began describing a place they had found that offered meals, nurses, and organized daily activities for older residents. She spoke about the facility in an almost cheerful voice, explaining how comfortable and safe it was supposed to be. Jason stood quietly beside her and nodded occasionally as if confirming everything she said. The way they described the place made it sound almost like a pleasant retreat rather than a facility for people who could no longer live independently. As I listened to them explain their plan, a slow heaviness began forming inside my chest. This house had been my home for nearly 4 decades and contained the memories of my entire adult life. I had raised Jason here after his father died and worked countless long nights to make sure he never felt the absence too deeply. Every sacrifice I made during those years was meant to give him a better future. Yet now they were standing in my kitchen calmly discussing a future that did not seem to include my place in this home. I finally asked the one question that mattered most to me at that moment, and it was a question that Jason seemed strangely hesitant to answer. I asked him how long they expected me to stay at this place they had chosen. He paused briefly before responding, which immediately made my heart feel uneasy. "Just until we figure a few things out," he said quietly while avoiding direct eye contact. Those vague words echoed in my mind because they could mean almost anything depending on how someone decided to interpret them. It could be a few days, a few weeks, or perhaps something much longer. In that moment, I began to understand that this conversation was not really about asking for my opinion. They had already decided that I would leave the house for a while. I realized they were simply informing me about a plan that had been made without my participation, and that realization quietly marked the beginning of a story that neither of them fully understood yet. That Tuesday morning, I stepped into the car with Jason and Danielle, trying to maintain a calm smile, though my chest felt heavy with confusion and unease. And the familiar streets I had driven countless times suddenly seemed foreign, as if they were preparing me for a life I did not recognize. Jason spoke softly about the facility, telling me it was clean, safe, and full of friendly staff who would take care of me. But every word felt rehearsed, like a script they had memorized long before arriving at the house. Danielle reached over and adjusted the blanket around my shoulders, her touch polite yet distant, and I could see the careful way she avoided looking directly at me in the eyes, as if acknowledging me fully was somehow dangerous. I glanced out the window at the houses passing by, each one filled with lives and families, wondering why mine was suddenly becoming a place I no longer belonged to. The ride was quiet, punctuated only by the soft hum of the tires on asphalt, and the occasional sigh escaping my lips as the reality of what was happening sank deeper. I tried to reason with myself, telling myself this might be temporary, a few days for them to feel better about my safety, yet a creeping unease whispered that it would not be simple. When we finally arrived, the building loomed like a pale shadow, its beige walls and plastic flowers outside feeling cold and sterile, the exact opposite of the warmth of my own home. Jason opened the car door and helped me out, as Danielle handed me a small bag with clothes I hadn't chosen, a reminder that I had lost control over the most basic decisions. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and air freshener, a scent meant to mask the reality of emptiness, and the nurses greeted me with smiles that felt more like rehearsed politeness than genuine concern. I followed quietly, holding my bag close, realizing with a sinking heart that the place they called safe felt like a cage dressed in comfort. They led me to a small room with pale yellow walls and a single bed that seemed too stiff and unforgiving for a person used to decades of familiarity, and as I looked around, I realized there were no personal touches, no photographs, no memories left to anchor me to who I was. A nurse explained the schedule, visiting hours and rules in a voice so cheerful it felt sharp against the quiet tension building inside me, and she showed me where the emergency call button was, as if my life now depended entirely on a stranger's schedule. I placed my bag on the bed and ran my fingers over the simple linen, feeling the absence of softness that reminded me of home, and I could not help but notice the clock on the wall. Its ticking, a reminder that time here moved at someone else's pace. Jason smiled, a thin, controlled smile, and patted my shoulder gently, his hand brushing mine with a familiarity that felt foreign in this space, and Danielle nodded in agreement, as though they had completed some invisible checklist. The words they spoke about my safety sounded hollow because they ignored the years I had lived independently, the hardships I had faced alone, and the sacrifices I had made for the very people now standing over me. I could feel a quiet anger building, not loud, not visible yet, but deep and resolute, a fire sparked by betrayal and the subtle erosion of dignity. I remembered every moment I had given up for Jason, every night I had stayed awake worrying, every penny I had saved and spent on his education, clothing, and dreams, and the realization hit me that they had dismissed all of it as if my efforts were meaningless. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped, staring at the floor, feeling the coldness of the linoleum beneath my feet, and thought about what it meant to be considered a burden by your own child. I could hear voices echoing down the hall, other residents moving in patterns dictated by the rules, unaware of the battles being fought silently within their own hearts. And in that moment, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would not fade away. I would not disappear quietly. They had underestimated the woman who raised a son, and I knew the reckoning would be deliberate, measured, and unforgettable. The next morning, I woke early, my mind already racing with observations and plans, noticing how the sunlight slanted through the narrow window onto the floor, and imagining every possible route for regaining control over my life. I asked the nurse for a pen and notebook, claiming I liked to journal, and she handed me one with a smile, unaware that this small spiral-bound notebook would become my map, my ledger, and my silent weapon. Each line I wrote, I recorded facts, names, account numbers, and memories, assembling the evidence I needed to prove I was competent, aware, and not the fragile shadow they assumed me to be. I reviewed my finances quietly, noting that access to my accounts had been interfered with, and made careful lists of what needed attention, including legal documents that Jason had already tried to manipulate. Every observation I made felt like a small victory, a reminder that though they thought I was powerless, I still had agency and awareness that could not be stripped away. That day, I called my lawyer, Monica Reeves, leaving a precise, factual message outlining what had occurred, and I waited with controlled patience for her response, knowing the law could be my ally if wielded correctly. While waiting, I explored the facility in quiet, noting routines, schedules, and staff interactions, understanding that every detail could be useful if used strategically. I ate my meals with deliberate attention, not as sustenance alone, but as a way to demonstrate my self-sufficiency and clarity of mind. Each visitor, each glance, each whispered comment from staff became data in my mind, part of the larger plan slowly taking shape, and though I remained outwardly calm inside, I was preparing for a return to the life that had been taken from me. A return that would not simply restore what was mine, but claim justice in a way that could not be ignored. By midweek, Monica returned my call, her voice a mixture of concern and determination, and we discussed the forged documents, the power of attorney that had been misused, and the immediate steps to reclaim my rights legally and financially. I explained everything in detail, emphasizing my mental competence, my independence, and the history of my sacrifices for Jason, painting a clear picture of the deliberate nature of his actions. Monica promised to take swift action, filing emergency motions and advising me on the steps to revoke any unauthorized control over my property and accounts. I felt a small, controlled thrill at the thought of regaining power in the situation that had been manipulated against me, understanding that my patience and quiet observation had positioned me for a decisive strike. That evening I sat on the edge of the bed with my notebook open, reviewing everything again and making plans for the precise moments when each legal action would unfold. I reflected on my own strength, the decades of resilience that had allowed me to face hardship and loss without surrendering, and realized that nothing could break me now, not even betrayal by a child. The thought brought a sense of calm, a quiet satisfaction, because I understood that true power was in patience, in waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was yours. I wrote down a schedule, not for the facility, not for anyone else, but for myself, plotting every move with deliberate care and ensuring that each action would be effective and undeniable. And as the lights dimmed that night, I closed my notebook, feeling a sense of clarity and purpose that the bright fluorescent halls could not touch. The fire inside me was no longer hidden. It was quiet, controlled, and ready. Thursday morning arrived with a quiet tension that settled over the facility like a heavy fog, and I woke with a purpose sharper than any fear or hesitation that had lingered before. Knowing today could mark the first real steps toward reclaiming my life. I reviewed my notebook once more, checking each detail, confirming every name, number, and account, and imagined how the pieces would fit together once Monica began her work in earnest. Jason and Danielle had convinced themselves I was fragile, helpless, and unaware. Yet I moved with deliberate calm, understanding that my restraint was the most powerful tool I now possessed. I noticed small things in the room, the way the sunlight hit the wall, the hum of the air conditioner, and the rhythm of the other residents moving about as if the universe itself was quietly conspiring to bear witness to my careful preparation. Each meal I ate, each call I made, and every interaction with staff became part of a quiet strategy, a demonstration that I was fully in control despite appearances to the contrary. Monica called mid-morning with updates detailing the paperwork being filed, the emergency motions submitted, and the initial legal steps to reclaim my accounts and property, and I listened carefully, absorbing each word and imagining the effect on Jason when he realized the tide had turned. I spent the afternoon cataloging photographs, letters, and legal documents, ensuring that nothing could be overlooked, and felt a quiet thrill as I realized that all the years of preparation, patience, and observation were finally converging toward tangible action. The room felt smaller now, not suffocating but focused, as if its beige walls were holding a secret that only I knew. I wrote letters to banks and service providers, clarifying my ownership and rights, while making notes on Monica's instructions, fully aware that every precise action would strip away Jason's false sense of control. And when evening fell, I sat by the window, notebook closed, breathing in the calm of my strategy, knowing that while I appeared calm and compliant, a storm of justice was quietly brewing, and the first thunder would soon be mine to unleash. That night's sleep was impossible, but not from anxiety. It was the anticipation of reassertion, a mental rehearsal of the moves I would make to reclaim my life and dignity, knowing that Jason and Danielle had underestimated both my patience and my resolve. I thought about the house, the home I had maintained and loved for decades, now treated as if it were a disposable asset by the very people I had raised and sacrificed for. I visualized the moment they would realize that every plan they had carefully constructed to remove me had failed, and that the woman they thought weak and compliant was fully aware and armed with every legal, financial, and strategic tool necessary to reclaim what was rightfully hers. I imagined Jason's expression when he first learned that the power of attorney he had manipulated would be revoked, that the accounts he thought he controlled would be frozen, and that his sense of dominance would be stripped away with quiet precision. The notebook beside my bed was more than paper. It was a ledger of justice, a chronicle of meticulous planning, and a symbol of resilience and preparation, a tangible reminder of the life they tried to erase. I reflected on the past decades, the long nights of worry, the sacrifices, the hidden tears, and the silent endurance, and felt a surge of pride for the woman who had persevered, who had survived betrayal, illness, and loneliness, and who was now poised to assert her rightful place. The facility, with its cold walls and rigid schedule, had unknowingly become my ally, giving me a space to observe, record, and prepare without the distractions of the home I had once maintained. I considered Tyler, my grandson, and the role he would play as a witness to the truth, understanding that he was part of the legacy I intended to protect and restore. Each action was deliberate, each note written a statement of intent, and each observation noted a potential advantage, all converging toward the moment when I would emerge not as a victim, but as the orchestrator of my own justice. As I finally lay down, eyes wide open in the darkness, I felt a sense of clarity and control that no fear, no betrayal, and no manipulation could ever take away, knowing that tomorrow, the first move of my plan would take tangible form, and Jason and Danielle would soon learn the true meaning of underestimating me. By Friday morning, Monica had completed her preparations and called to outline the legal steps that would be executed immediately, explaining with a quiet authority how the emergency motions, document verifications, and account freezes would unfold. And I absorbed every word with a steady, deliberate focus. I dressed carefully, choosing clothing that reflected my dignity and strength rather than fear or fragility, understanding that appearances mattered when asserting authority in a world that had tried to erase me. The nurse brought breakfast, unaware of the storm brewing, and I ate slowly, savoring each bite while planning the precise steps I would take after the first course to Monica. I reviewed my notebook, adding a few final notes on timing, responses, and contingencies, ensuring that nothing would slip through the cracks and that every action would carry the weight of inevitability. My mind flashed back to the countless nights I had stayed awake worrying for Jason, planning meals, finances, and milestones, and I realized with quiet satisfaction that the tables had turned. Now he would witness the consequences of his choices, not through anger but through the quiet, undeniable clarity of law and fact. I rehearsed my conversation in my mind, noting where firmness would be necessary, where calmness would amplify the impact, and where silence could speak louder than words, knowing that the smallest details would compound into the most devastating results. Every movement that day, every call, and every note I wrote felt like a step closer to reclaiming the life that had been temporarily stolen from me, and a reminder that patience, observation, and precise action could overpower betrayal. I imagined the relief and satisfaction I would feel when the first legal confirmations came through, proving not only my competence but also the consequences of underestimating a mother and grandmother who refused to fade quietly. The day passed in a controlled rhythm, each task executed with deliberate care, each step a testament to resilience and strategic patience, and by evening I felt a deep, quiet sense of power settling over me, a reassurance that the storm I had patiently cultivated was ready to be unleashed. And as I looked out the window at the fading light, I felt a connection to every sacrifice I had made, every injustice endured, and every quiet moment of planning, knowing that my presence, awareness, and patience were now more powerful than any threat Jason or Danielle could imagine. Saturday morning arrived with the soft glow of sunlight spilling through the blinds, casting long, deliberate shadows across the beige walls of the facility room where I sat quietly sipping my tea, feeling a calm that contrasted sharply with the storm I had been orchestrating, knowing today would mark the first concrete steps toward reclaiming my independence. Monica called early, her voice crisp and professional, detailing the filings she had submitted overnight, the responses she expected from the banks, and the emergency motion to revoke Jason's fraudulent power of attorney, and I listened carefully, letting each word settle like measured instruction, a roadmap for justice. I reviewed my notebook again, making sure every detail was in place, the account numbers, the deeds, the legal forms, and the timeline of events, and noted how every small observation, every whispered lie they had told, would now work against them in a way they could never anticipate. The nurses moved about the room, oblivious to the quiet transformation occurring in my mind. The same hands that once baked, scrubbed, and nursed, now drafting a strategy that would restore dignity, reclaim property, and assert control with deliberate authority. Each action, I imagined the revocation, the freezing of accounts, the legal summons, was carefully rehearsed in my mind, and I smiled faintly, appreciating the irony that the very system they had thought would silence me was now the vehicle of my empowerment. I reflected on the years spent raising Jason alone, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, and the endless labor, and felt a deep surge of quiet strength, knowing that those same hands that had worked tirelessly could now enforce accountability and reclaim respect. The notebook beside my bed was more than paper. It was a ledger of resilience, a chronicle of careful planning, and a tangible representation of the patience and intelligence I had cultivated over decades, now converging into decisive action. I imagined Jason reading the notices, the shock spreading across his face as he realized the legal power he assumed was never his to wield, and I felt a thrill of satisfaction tempered by calm, deliberate planning rather than hasty rage. The afternoon passed with meticulous attention to detail, calls, confirmations, and careful observation of staff, each step reinforcing the inevitability of the outcome I had long envisioned, the quiet hum of the facility becoming a symphony to my patience and resolve. And when evening came, I sat by the window, notebook closed, tea cold but untouched, knowing that the first legal victories were now moving through the system, and Jason's world, which had once seemed invincible, was about to be quietly, irrevocably disrupted. By mid-afternoon, the calls from Monica had begun to trickle in, updates delivered in measured tones, confirming that the banks had frozen the joint accounts, that the emergency motions were being processed, and that the documents Jason had assumed he controlled were now under review, each confirmation reinforcing the deliberate patience that had guided me for weeks. I reviewed my own records, cross-referencing account numbers, property deeds, and past legal forms, feeling a quiet satisfaction at the meticulousness of my preparation, understanding that inattention or haste had never been part of my strategy, only precision and endurance. I thought about Danielle, her smug confidence, her subtle manipulations, and the way she had relied on Jason's assumptions, and I smiled faintly, knowing that every deceitful act would now unravel under scrutiny, and that the very arrogance that had allowed them to act freely was the same weakness that would expose them completely. I wrote a short note in my spiral notebook outlining the exact steps for the next day, anticipating responses from the legal system and planning contingencies, aware that forethought and control were my allies while haste and emotion were my enemies. The light in the room shifted as clouds moved across the sun, creating patterns that danced along the walls, shadows mimicking the subtle movements of strategy and patience. and I imagined the contrast between my calm preparation and their growing unease as the consequences of their betrayal approached. Every meal I ate, every small action, was infused with intention, as if the simple act of daily living could simultaneously nourish me and reinforce my readiness to reclaim autonomy and dignity. I reflected on Tyler, my grandson, picturing the moments I would share with him once the chaos settled, teaching him about resilience, patience, and quiet strength, and how he would witness firsthand that dignity could not be stolen, only ignored temporarily. The room, quiet yet alive with possibility, felt like the command center for a story of justice in which I was both author and protagonist, a narrative carefully unfolding with each observation, phone call, and written note. The evening deepened into night, and I sat by the window, notebook closed, heart steady, knowing that tomorrow the first tangible moves of my plan would be enacted, and that Jason and Danielle, who had assumed control over my life, would begin to feel the weight of consequences they had never anticipated. And as I watched the shadows stretch across the floor, I understood that true power lies in patience, preparation, and the quiet, inexorable unfolding of justice that no manipulation can suppress. The next morning I woke before sunrise, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the distant chirping of birds, a gentle contrast to the tension I anticipated would soon ripple through Jason's world. And I sipped my tea, slowly feeling the weight of calm strategies settle over me like a warm shawl. Monica had called again early, her voice precise and deliberate, confirming that all documents for the emergency motion had been submitted and were scheduled for review, a necessary first step to dismantle the false authority Jason had claimed over my affairs. I reviewed the notebook one more time, each entry, a testament to careful observation, to the patience I had cultivated over years of life and motherhood, reminding myself that vengeance without planning is wasted energy, while deliberate action creates lasting impact. The staff in the facility moved about, unaware of the quiet storm unfolding, and I observed their routines with a meticulous eye, noting timings and procedures, because even small details could become significant when leveraged correctly in the unfolding plan. Memories of Jason as a child flashed through my mind, the scraped knees, the late nights studying the first day of school, the way he had trusted me implicitly, and I felt a surge of both sorrow and determination, knowing that the betrayal I had endured demanded not just retribution, but reclamation of respect and dignity. I visualized the moment when the court would recognize my competence, when every fraudulent document would be exposed, and when the simple truth that I was never incapacitated would invalidate the narrative Jason had built. And a quiet thrill passed through me at the inevitability of it all. I took a deep breath and imagined Danielle's reaction, her composure faltering as she realized that the house she and Jason had assumed belonged to them would never be theirs legally, that the security and power they counted on was being stripped away with precision and patience. The afternoon passed with careful attention to minor details, phone calls, document verification, and subtle coordination with Monica, each act reinforcing the sense that control was slowly returning to my hands, and that every moment of calm was a strategic advantage. I watched the sunlight shift, the blinds' patterns of light dancing across the room, and marveled at how ordinary life could feel so deliberate and intentional when viewed through the lens of quiet strategy, patience, and the anticipation of justice. As night fell, I sat by the window, notebook closed, tea cold, and allowed myself a small smile, feeling the satisfaction of knowing that the first legal victories were now moving through the system, and that Jason and Danielle would soon confront consequences they had never imagined. Later that evening, Monica arrived with a stack of documents and a calm expression that conveyed confidence without arrogance, explaining in precise terms the next steps of the emergency filing, and how quickly the courts would respond to evidence of fraud and elder exploitation, reinforcing the certainty of the outcomes I had meticulously planned. I listened carefully, asking pointed questions about timelines, potential objections, and how each document could be challenged or strengthened, appreciating the professionalism and the steady reassurance that I was not alone in this fight, that the law could finally serve as the shield I had long needed. I revisited the notebook, adding observations about previous conversations, confirming dates and events, and noting inconsistencies in the narrative Jason had told others, each line a thread in a tapestry of undeniable proof that would support the legal case. The gentle hum of the heater and the occasional distant siren outside contrasted sharply with the storm I had orchestrated behind the scenes. a quiet duality that reminded me how patience can often disguise power until it strikes at precisely the right moment. I thought about Tyler and how he had begun to understand the importance of truth, integrity, and resilience, and how, once this chapter concluded, he would witness firsthand the dignity of standing firm in the face of betrayal. The day stretched onward, marked by small victories, confirmations from the bank that the accounts were temporarily frozen, responses from legal clerks acknowledging receipt of motions, and subtle shifts in the tone of correspondence that hinted at recognition of the severity of Jason's actions. I imagined the moment Jason would read the first notice, his face paling as he realized that every manipulation, every assumption of control was now invalidated, and I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that justice would arrive without drama, only through methodical, unwavering execution. By late afternoon, I reflected on the years of sacrifice and love I had poured into raising him, the sleepless nights, the hands that bled and hearts that stretched endlessly, and felt a quiet strength in knowing that none of it had been in vain, that my endurance had finally translated into empowerment. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the facility room, and I sat back in my chair, notebook closed, tea untouched, feeling a serenity that was both calm and electrifying, the kind of calm that precedes transformation and triumph. And as the evening deepened into night, I understood fully that patience, preparation, and deliberate action were far more potent than anger or haste, and that by sunrise, the first tangible victories in reclaiming my autonomy would begin. The next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the blinds, casting long, warm stripes across the floor as I sipped my tea, feeling a calm determination settle over me like armor. Monica had arrived early, carrying an organized stack of legal paperwork and a folder containing the emergency motion for revocation, and we discussed every detail with meticulous precision, ensuring that nothing could be contested or overlooked by Jason or his lawyer. I went over each line of the documents, noting dates, signatures, and supporting evidence from the notebook I had kept, feeling a steady satisfaction in how the meticulous records would prove my competence and reveal Jason's fraudulent actions. The facility hummed quietly with morning routines. Nurses and aides moved about, unaware that I was orchestrating a reclaiming of control that would soon ripple into Jason and Danielle's lives. Thoughts of Tyler came to mind, his innocence and trust in me, a sharp contrast to the betrayal I endured, and I resolved that nothing would compromise the sanctuary I was rebuilding for him. Monica explained the timing of the filings, the expected court responses, and how each step would expose the manipulation and elder exploitation, giving me a sense of power that felt long overdue. I pictured Jason reading the notices, his confidence evaporating as he realized every assumption of control was invalid, and a quiet thrill passed through me at the inevitability of justice unfolding. The afternoon passed in careful attention to detail, confirming court submissions, reviewing copies of bank freezes, and maintaining the notebook as a strategic record of every event, every conversation, every discrepancy. Outside, the sky shifted to muted blues and golds, and I found a sense of calm in watching ordinary life continue even as extraordinary change was underway, reinforcing the patience and deliberation required for true reclamation. By evening, I sat with a renewed sense of quiet victory, feeling that the first tangible steps to restore my autonomy and dignity had been laid, and knowing that each sunrise would bring progress closer to completion. Later that evening, I reflected on the stark contrast between the world I had nurtured for Jason as a child and the betrayal that had brought me here in a room that smelled faintly of disinfectant, orchestrating a comeback that would redefine his understanding of respect and consequence. Monica's guidance had been steady, professional, and unwavering, emphasizing that the law would serve as a shield and that patience and precision would yield results far beyond any immediate gratification or reactive revenge. I revisited the notebook, rereading entries that documented conversations, discrepancies, and instances where Jason and Danielle had overstepped, feeling a quiet satisfaction that every detail I had recorded now formed the backbone of undeniable evidence. I envisioned Danielle's reaction when the court filings reached her, imagining the subtle yet unmistakable panic that would ripple through her carefully curated sense of control, a reminder that actions have consequences even when they are initially concealed. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, feeling the years of sacrifice, the nights of worry, the skipped meals, the hands that ached from labor coalesced into a profound understanding that endurance and meticulous preparation could achieve far more than anger alone. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the room and signaling the close of another day, and I sat quietly letting the calm assurance of strategic action wash over me as I visualized the unfolding of justice in precise, deliberate increments. Each passing hour reinforced the lesson that patience, observation, and deliberate action were far more effective than haste or loud confrontation, and I found solace in the knowledge that Jason's illusions of control were beginning to unravel. I thought of Tyler and the life I was determined to protect, the trust and innocence that needed safeguarding, and felt a renewed strength in the conviction that his future would remain untouched by the selfishness of others. As night deepened, I closed the notebook, set the tea aside, and allowed myself a quiet smile, understanding fully that the foundation for reclamation had been laid and that the coming days would bring visible, undeniable consequences to those who underestimated me. With Monica's reassurance, my calm vigilance, and the weight of documented truth, I finally felt the first waves of true empowerment ripple through the quiet room, a subtle promise of what was to come. The following morning I woke early to the gentle hum of life outside my window, the neighborhood stirring with its usual rhythm, while inside I prepared for a day that would shift everything in Jason and Danielle's carefully constructed world. I brewed coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, and glanced at the notebook beside me, its pages, a silent testament to planning, resilience, and careful observation, each word, each note, a piece of the puzzle that would ensure justice and reclaim my dignity. Monica arrived shortly after, briefcase in hand, calm and purposeful, walking through the motions of submitting additional filings and confirming court notifications, her presence reinforcing my confidence that no detail would be overlooked. We discussed the psychological impact of seeing the legal documents arrive at Jason and Danielle's house, how a well-timed notice could undermine their assumptions of control without a word needing to be spoken directly. I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that all the planning, all the patience, and all the endurance I had cultivated over the years was converging into a decisive action that would finally validate every sacrifice I had made as a mother and grandmother. Tyler stopped by that morning, backpack slung over his shoulder, eyes curious but trusting, and I took a moment to show him the roses in bloom, sharing stories of patience, care, and the quiet power of consistency, making sure he understood that justice was measured in calm persistence rather than anger. Monica and I reviewed the bank freezes, the signed affidavits, and witness statements, ensuring every document could withstand scrutiny, while I allowed myself to feel the thrill of control returning to my hands after years of helplessness. By mid-afternoon, the court filings were officially submitted, and I felt the subtle excitement of knowing that soon the news would reach the other side, disrupting the illusion of power Jason and Danielle had so casually assumed. I took a moment to breathe, appreciating the contrast between the chaos they had created in my life and the deliberate serenity I now maintained, every step measured, every action precise, as though life itself had aligned to reward careful patience. Evening arrived with a soft golden light spilling through the curtains, and I sat quietly sipping my tea, watching the shadows stretch across the floor, feeling a deep sense of calm and satisfaction in knowing the first tangible effects of my plan were imminent and unstoppable. By late afternoon, a subtle tension seemed to hover over the neighborhood, unnoticed by most, but sharply felt by me. Every movement, every door opening or closing, every car passing became part of an invisible rhythm that marked the beginning of my quiet reclamation. I imagined Jason noticing the first legal notices on the doormat, Danielle reacting to the sudden disruption of her sense of superiority, and a subtle smile turned at my lips, knowing that the patience I had cultivated would now reveal its power. Monica explained the procedural timelines, the expected reactions, and how each step would compound, creating an unavoidable pressure that would test their confidence and composure, a slow but deliberate unfolding that would highlight the consequences of their betrayal. Tyler came over again, his presence a reminder of the life I was protecting, and we worked together in the garden, planting seeds not only for flowers, but for patience, resilience, and the cultivation of a sense of home that Jason could never undermine. I reflected on the years of sacrifice, the nights of worry, and the unwavering dedication that had built a foundation for Tyler's trust. Knowing that these invisible layers of care and strategy would ultimately overshadow any temporary sense of power held by Jason and Danielle, Monica and I reviewed the steps for the upcoming court appearance, ensuring that every statement, every fact, and every witness testimony would be delivered with clarity and authority, reinforcing that my legal and moral position was unassailable. As the sun set casting long orange shadows through the living room, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, a quiet joy that was measured not in revenge, but in the restoration of dignity and respect that had been denied to me. The neighborhood quieted, children's laughter fading, cars returning to garages, and I felt a contrast between the external stillness and the internal satisfaction that came from knowing the storm I had weathered was now giving way to a new, controlled order. Night descended with soft shadows and cool air, and I closed my journal reflecting on the delicate balance between patience planning and the eventual fulfillment of justice. Understanding fully that what I had built would stand far longer than the fleeting arrogance of those who sought to erase me. In those quiet moments, I realized that true power is measured not by reaction, but by preparation, resilience, and the unwavering commitment to protect those we love, while reclaiming what was always ours. The following morning, I woke with the soft light of dawn spilling through the curtains, feeling a sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with inevitability today. The first tangible effects of my plan would ripple through Jason and Danielle's fragile bubble. I brewed tea, inhaling the calming aroma while reviewing the timeline Monica had prepared, each checkpoint deliberate, each step measured, ensuring that the legal notices and filings would arrive in perfect sequence, leaving no room for surprise or error. Tyler wandered in, sleepy-eyed and curious, asking if we could make breakfast together, and I smiled, understanding that nurturing his trust and showing him patience was as much part of my strategy as any document or court motion. We cooked pancakes and eggs, laughing softly at little mistakes, and I felt the joy of ordinary life, the quiet strength of living moments untouched by betrayal, yet quietly building a counterbalance to the chaos left behind. Monica called mid-morning to confirm the delivery of the notices. Jason's lawyer had received them, and the reaction, though delayed, would come soon, starting a chain that could not be ignored or reversed. I spent the next hour tending to the garden, pruning roses and marigolds, feeling the tactile satisfaction of growth under my hands, a metaphor for the patience, resilience, and meticulous planning that had defined every move of this long-awaited reclamation. My mind wandered briefly to the past, to the years Jason had dismissed Danielle's dismissive comments, to moments of exhaustion and quiet despair, and I felt a wave of vindicated calm, knowing the pendulum of accountability had begun to swing. By afternoon, the neighborhood seemed subtly off-kilter, an invisible tension hanging in the air, as if the world sensed a shift, though most would never realize it. I watched from the porch, tea in hand, and allowed myself a quiet smile. Monica stopped by later, her calm presence reassuring as she detailed the next steps, emphasizing how the filings coupled with the freeze on the accounts would create a pressure they could not ignore, reinforcing that control had returned to my hands. As evening settled, the golden light painted the porch in warm hues. Tyler played nearby, laughter bubbling softly through the air, and I felt the serene satisfaction of watching justice unfold silently. A storm prepared with precision and patience, finally touching down on those who had underestimated me. I spent the evening writing in my journal, documenting each event, noting reactions, and reflecting on how my own strength had been quietly underestimated for years. Each word on the page solidified the narrative I was living, a testament to resilience, foresight, and the patient orchestration of a carefully constructed plan. Tyler helped me place the newly purchased house next door into a mental map, walking the perimeter and noting every window, every porch, every vantage point, understanding intuitively that this act was about presence, observation, and the unspoken reclamation of my space and dignity. Monica reviewed potential counters and anticipated delays, explaining in her calm, precise manner how any attempt to resist the legal measures would falter under scrutiny, reinforcing my confidence that the path I had chosen was not only ethical but strategically sound. That night, I cooked a small dinner, just the two of us, reflecting on how the simplest act, sharing a meal, tending a garden, watching roses bloom, could carry as much emotional weight as any courtroom victory. I thought about the contrast between the chaos Jason and Danielle had left behind and the calm, deliberate rhythm I now maintained, understanding that patience and persistence were far more powerful than rage or immediate retaliation. The soft hum of the neighborhood at night provided a soundtrack to reflection, The contrast between the quiet of my home and the looming tension next door, a constant reminder that control and peace were intertwined, cultivated deliberately over time. Tyler asked questions about the legal process, about the notices, about what it felt like to reclaim something that had been stolen. And I answered carefully, balancing honesty with reassurance, teaching him the principles of patience, resilience, and justice in action. I reviewed my journal once more, noting the meticulous planning, the emotional clarity, and the strategic patience that had brought me to this point, understanding fully that this story was not about vengeance alone, but about reclaiming autonomy, dignity, and the trust of the next generation. The porch light flickered on as dusk settled, casting long shadows over the rose bushes, and I felt the thrill of knowing that the first ripples of disruption had begun, a quiet yet undeniable echo of accountability that would soon resonate fully. In the deep quiet of that evening, sipping my tea and watching Tyler play, I understood that true power was not loud or vengeful. It was deliberate, patient, and profoundly satisfying, flowing from knowledge, preparation, and an unwavering commitment to what was right. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently across the porch, catching the roses I had planted along the fence, their petals glimmering like small flames of persistence, and I felt the quiet thrill of control returning to my life. Tyler wandered out, backpack slung low, asking if we could start the day with gardening, and I smiled, knowing that teaching him patience, observation, and care was just as vital as any legal maneuver I had set in motion. Monica called early to report the responses from the notices. Jason's lawyer had reacted with shock, confirming that our filings had struck the exact chord I had anticipated, leaving him momentarily paralyzed in his own arrogance. I sipped tea slowly, observing the subtle changes in the neighborhood, the way the mailman lingered a little longer, the faint looks from neighbors, curious but cautious, sensing something shifting without knowing its full weight. By mid-morning, Tyler and I worked side by side in the garden, his small hands learning to press earth around new seedlings, understanding silently that growth was patient, deliberate, and rewarding in ways that mirrored my own reclamation of dignity and space. I paused to reflect on the contrast between my calm, calculated actions and the chaos Jason and Danielle had created, realizing that the most powerful form of correction was often quiet, unseen, yet undeniably effective. Monica suggested strategic visibility, emphasizing that seeing me live freely, with purpose and joy, was in itself a psychological reminder to those who had tried to erase me, reinforcing that presence was as potent as any document or court order. Afternoon settled over the neighborhood like a soft blanket, and I felt the harmony of small victories, each one a testament to years of endurance, planning, and quiet observation. As Tyler ran around, laughter blending with the hum of distant traffic, I reviewed my journal again, noting each legal step, emotional nuance, and strategic decision, confirming that the plan unfolded precisely as intended, with patience, precision, and purpose guiding every choice. That evening I prepared dinner with Tyler, sharing stories of the past, explaining subtle lessons about trust, resilience, and boundaries, ensuring that the next generation understood that strength was not loud but deliberate, and that dignity could be reclaimed even when it had been dismissed. As night fell, the porch lights illuminated the garden, casting shadows that danced among the roses, and I felt a profound satisfaction in watching them bloom under my care, a symbol of persistence, patience, and the quiet victories that had begun to reshape our lives. Tyler helped set the table, asking questions about how adults navigate betrayal and restitution, and I answered thoughtfully, blending honesty with careful guidance, reinforcing lessons of measured response and resilience. Monica called again to confirm the next legal filings, her calm voice a steady anchor, reminding me that control was being restored in layers, and every detail mattered for the ultimate outcome. I walked through the house, noting the serene spaces, the soft furnishings, the sense of calm that contrasted sharply with the tension and chaos left behind next door, understanding fully that reclaiming physical space was inseparable from reclaiming emotional peace. Tyler asked if we could paint together later, and I agreed, knowing that these ordinary, joyful moments were the foundation of normalcy and strength, giving him and me both the reassurance of life continuing uninterrupted by past betrayal. I thought about the strategy that had brought us here, about the balance of patience, visibility, and subtle influence, and how it contrasted sharply with the impulsive, self-serving actions of Jason and Danielle, highlighting the power of deliberate action over rash emotion. As the evening deepened, I prepared tea, placing it on the porch table, inviting Tyler to join me in reflection, appreciating the slow, quiet victories that unfolded like petals in the afternoon sun. Monica's advice echoed in my mind. Let the actions speak louder than words. Let patience and precision guide the narrative, and ensure that every step reinforced autonomy and dignity. Tyler leaned back in his chair, sipping slowly, glancing at the roses along the fence, understanding in his own way that these blooms were more than plants, they were symbols of endurance, strategy, and reclaimed presence. The night settled around us gently, a curtain of calm over a day carefully orchestrated, and I felt the deep satisfaction of seeing the first tangible effects of justice ripple quietly through the lives of those who had once tried to erase me. Morning light filtered through the curtains, falling softly on the kitchen table where Tyler sat arranging his schoolwork. His focus a comforting reminder that life moves forward even after disruption, and that small routines can anchor the most turbulent days. I brewed tea, inhaling the familiar scent of leaves steeping, and realized that this ordinary ritual had become a quiet symbol of reclaimed normalcy, a mark of control after the storm of betrayal. Monica had called the night before with updates on the neighborhood's reaction, confirming that word of Jason and Danielle's humiliation had quietly spread, and I understood that social awareness coupled with legal reclamation was restoring my reputation as much as my rights. Tyler asked about the house next door, curious why it had remained so quiet, and I explained gently, framing it as the natural consequence of choices, reinforcing that integrity and thoughtfulness carry weight in ways impulsive aggression cannot match. I spent the morning reviewing my journal, tracing each action, each decision, noting how patience, subtlety, and calm observation had turned a moment of personal violation into a broader lesson of resilience and prudence. Tyler's laughter broke through my reflections, reminding me that joy and connection, however small, could flourish even amidst lingering tension, and that nurturing these moments was part of our healing. Monica suggested we prepare documentation for the eventual transfer of the house to Tyler's trust, ensuring that legal clarity mirrored the emotional boundaries we had established, and that our reclaimed space was secured for future stability. As I glanced at the garden, the roses swaying gently in the breeze, I felt a quiet pride in the tangible representation of perseverance, patience, and the beauty that can grow from deliberate action, a visual echo of every step we had carefully taken. Tyler asked to help me prune the plants, and together we worked, his small hands learning precision, care, and the joy of cultivating life, an intimate lesson that paralleled the reclamation of dignity and space. The afternoon waned gently, leaving golden light across the porch, and I sat back with my cup of tea, feeling the satisfaction of strategy unfolding perfectly. The weight of past injustice lifted, replaced by deliberate empowerment and the knowledge that our presence, calm and deliberate, commanded attention without force. Evening settled in, painting the sky in muted shades of lavender and gold, and Tyler and I shared a quiet meal, the rhythm of conversation and laughter, a stark contrast to the tension and betrayal that had dominated recent weeks. Monica's voice echoed in my memory, emphasizing patience, calculated visibility, and the importance of letting others confront their own choices, reinforcing the lesson that power often lies in restraint, observation, and careful, deliberate steps. Tyler asked about my childhood, about moments when I had felt alone or burdened, and I shared stories carefully, threading lessons of endurance, wisdom, and the quiet strength that had carried me through loss, betrayal, and near defeat. I reflected on the contrast between the chaos left by Jason and Danielle and the serene, deliberate calm we now fostered, realizing that control, dignity, and peace are cultivated, not demanded, and that patience often exacts a more enduring impact than rage. Monica called briefly with confirmation that all legal documents had been correctly filed and that Tyler's trust fund would ensure financial security, reinforcing the importance of preparation, foresight, and measured action in reclaiming what had been taken. As night deepened, the porch lights cast a warm glow across the garden, highlighting the blooms, their vibrancy a testament to patience, care, and the enduring beauty of deliberate cultivation, both in life and in relationships. Tyler and I worked together to organize a small space for reading, arranging books, notes, and mementos, fostering a sense of continuity, learning, and stability that echo the emotional reclamation we had pursued. I watched Tyler settle in, the quiet focus in his eyes a reflection of resilience and hope, and I felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that our regained control extended beyond property and into nurturing the next generation. Monica's advice to maintain calm observation, avoid reactive engagement, and continue measured actions resonated, reminding me that presence, dignity, and strategic patience were far more effective than confrontation or impulsive action. The night closed around us serene and quiet, a soft blanket over a day of deliberate triumph, and I felt the profound satisfaction of watching a plan executed with patience, clarity, and care, reclaiming space, dignity, and legacy without a word of shouting or aggression. The next morning, crisp and quiet, the kind of stillness that signals a fresh start, a chance to observe life without interference, and I relished it as I poured my tea and watched sunlight spill across the porch floor. Tyler sat beside me, notebook open, sketching roses and garden scenes, a calming ritual that mirrored my own process of mapping out boundaries, rights, and emotional safety after weeks of upheaval. The house next door remained eerily silent, a visual reminder that actions have consequences and that pride, cruelty, and dishonesty often lead to isolation, teaching lessons without direct confrontation. I reflected on the contrast between our reclaimed space and the chaos Jason and Danielle had brought, understanding that dignity and calm command more power than anger ever could, and that patience is a force often underestimated. Monica had reminded me that the law supports those who act with integrity, who document carefully and proceed deliberately, and this knowledge fortified my resolve, reinforcing the satisfaction of measured victories. Tyler asked about the community center and the donation we had made, curious how anonymous generosity could carry meaning, and I explained that impact is often more profound when it leaves room for gratitude without expectation, a principle I had learned painfully. The morning passed gently, punctuated by shared laughter, small chores, and the quiet satisfaction of watching the garden thrive, each bloom a metaphor for careful nurturing, persistence, and the rewards of deliberate action. I checked the mailbox and found nothing but routine notices, a comforting silence that contrasted sharply with the tension of the past weeks, allowing me to feel ownership over my time, space, and energy. Tyler and I planned the afternoon together, discussing books, hobbies, and community involvement, weaving normalcy into our lives after disruption, and reinforcing the value of consistent care, shared knowledge, and stability. As the sun climbed higher, I felt a sense of deep, steady contentment, knowing that our deliberate patience had not only reclaimed a home, but also restored the rhythm of everyday life anchored by presence, integrity, and the lessons of careful, strategic action. By noon, the warmth of the sun encouraged us to spend time outside tending to flowers and vegetables, each deliberate action a statement of ownership, care, and reclamation after betrayal, a subtle assertion that life continues even after wrongs have been done. Tyler asked questions about the past, about moments when people had failed me or treated me unfairly, and I answered honestly but carefully, framing lessons about resilience, patience, and the quiet power of foresight, without stirring bitterness. Monica had advised continuing documentation not out of distrust, but as a safeguard, a habit that reinforced control and confidence, turning what could have been fear into empowerment and deliberate action. We walked the garden path slowly, noting the blooms, pruning dead leaves, and reflecting on how attention to detail parallels the care required in navigating family, legal, and emotional challenges. Tyler remarked on the quietness next door and wondered aloud if people change when consequences finally arrive, prompting me to share that reflection, observation, and patience often teach lessons that anger cannot, a truth he absorbed quietly. I prepared lunch, allowing the aroma to fill the house, a simple pleasure that contrasted sharply with the cold, calculated silence of those who had tried to erase me, reinforcing the power of normalcy and presence. Monica called with updates on a local elder rights seminar, and I realized that sharing my experience could prevent others from facing similar erasure, making my actions not just personal victories, but lessons of broader significance. Tyler and I discussed ways to help, to be present, and to extend care beyond our own household, reinforcing the idea that empowerment comes not just from reclaiming what is ours, but by lifting others alongside us. The afternoon waned into golden light, shadows stretching across the garden, a silent testament to the passage of time, the continuity of life, and the quiet satisfaction of building something meaningful from deliberate, careful choices. I sat back on the porch, tea in hand, feeling the hum of peace, knowing that calm observation, patience, and strategic action had restored more than property. They had restored dignity, safety, and the possibility of growth for both of us. Venning settled over the neighborhood with a gentle hush, the kind of quiet that allows reflection and introspection, and I used it to observe life without distraction, sipping tea as Tyler arranged his books on the living room shelf. The smell of fresh cookies filled the air, a simple ritual that brought warmth and comfort, reminding me that reclaiming life is as much about small joys as it is about grand gestures of justice. I glanced toward the house next door, noting the drawn curtains and the faint silhouette of Jason pacing inside, and felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that our patience and perseverance had already left their mark without a single word exchanged. Monica's advice echoed in my mind. Influence through integrity and calculated action is far more lasting than reactive confrontation, and the unfolding calm demonstrated the truth in her words. Tyler asked about the roses along the fence, curious how something so beautiful could grow from careful tending, and I explained that nurturing requires time, attention, and patience, just like rebuilding trust and reclaiming dignity after betrayal. As we tidied the garden, I noticed the soft hum of bees among the blooms, a delicate reminder that life persists in rhythm with effort and care, and that observation and consistency are more powerful than any fleeting emotional reaction. The sun dipped lower, casting a warm golden glow across the yard, highlighting the growth and vibrancy of our reclaimed space, each bloom a testament to perseverance, resilience, and deliberate, thoughtful action. Tyler reflected quietly, noting that even small gestures of attention could have lasting impact, and I smiled, understanding that the lessons of patience, presence, and integrity were now part of his inheritance as much as the house, the garden, or the trust we were building. As night approached, the neighborhood fell silent, save for distant cars and occasional rustling leaves, a perfect setting to discuss plans for the coming days, blending ordinary life with the ongoing quiet assertion of our regained autonomy. Sitting on the porch, I let the calm wash over me, recognizing that the true power of patience, quiet strength, and strategic action was visible in every small deliberate choice we made, shaping not only our environment but the mindset of those who had once sought to diminish us. Later that night, Tyler and I prepared a simple dinner, the aroma of roasted vegetables and fresh bread filling the house, a contrast to the sterile silence that had pervaded the nursing home and our disrupted routines. Creating a space of warmth, care, and shared attention, we talked about school, friends, and stories of past generations, reinforcing the continuity of family love and guidance, and emphasizing that life moves forward when nurtured with intention and mindfulness. The garden lights twinkled faintly outside, casting soft reflections on the windows, a subtle symbol of security, presence, and the beauty of routine care after upheaval and disruption, reminding me that patience bears fruit in both plants and relationships. Monica called briefly to check progress and to remind me of the importance of documentation, not just for legal protection, but as a habit that reinforces confidence, agency, and preparedness, lessons I hope Tyler would carry forward. Tyler's questions were thoughtful, probing the nuances of right, wrong, and consequence, and I responded honestly, framing our experiences in a way that emphasized strategy, empathy, and long-term thinking rather than anger or revenge. We discussed ways to contribute quietly to the community, supporting elders and those facing challenges similar to mine, reinforcing that empowerment involves action beyond personal restitution and that strategic kindness is often as impactful as assertive defense. As the night deepened, I prepared Tyler for bed, recounting gentle stories, emphasizing calm resilience, and demonstrating that true control is not in retaliation, but in the ability to live freely, safely, and intentionally, despite the past. He slept soundly, and I stayed up, reviewing documents, planning community outreach, and organizing our lives to ensure that justice, dignity, and personal agency were firmly re-established, blending strategic planning with everyday care. The house felt alive with purpose, a sanctuary of deliberate decisions, calm presence, and subtle empowerment, each element reinforcing lessons of patience, perseverance, and quiet strength that Jason and Danielle could never replicate. As I finally set my pen down and looked out at the night sky, I felt an overwhelming sense of completion, knowing that measured, thoughtful action had reclaimed not only property and security, but respect, autonomy, and the ability to continue shaping the world on my terms. She had spent decades nurturing a family that had once been her world, pouring her love into every corner of their lives, only to be treated like she was invisible once the roles reversed. Every meal she cooked, every tear she wiped, every sleepless night she endured had been for the people who now ignored her existence. Sitting on the porch of her new home, a gentle breeze stirring the roses she had planted herself, she reflected on how quickly love can turn into neglect, how patience can outlast betrayal, and how silence can sometimes speak louder than any argument. Her grandson Tyler was the only spark of warmth in her life now, reminding her that not all relationships were tainted by selfishness or greed. She remembered the hollow look in her son's eyes, the way his voice faltered when he realized she had reclaimed everything he thought he had stolen. The quiet satisfaction of seeing justice unfold was something she had never experienced before, a bittersweet victory that blended grief, relief, and empowerment into a single, resolute feeling. Every morning she brewed her tea, carefully measured, and sipped it while watching the neighborhood awaken, knowing she was no longer living in fear, but in deliberate control of her destiny. The furniture she chose, the painting she painted, even the small moments of conversation with neighbors were acts of reclaiming autonomy she had once been denied. She smiled at the thought of her son watching her life go on, realizing he could no longer dictate her choices or diminish her presence. For the first time in years, she felt completely unburdened, as though every slight, every moment of neglect had been transformed into a shield of self-respect she wore proudly. Her mind wandered back to the day she'd discovered the truth, the forged documents, the manipulated accounts, and the calculated indifference that had nearly erased her from existence. Each memory was sharp, but instead of bitterness consuming her, she allowed it to reinforce her strength, to show her that resilience was the ultimate answer to cruelty. Tyler had become her companion, her confidant, and in some ways her reason for finding light in the aftermath of her son's betrayal. They tended the garden together, planted tomatoes, and shared stories over home-cooked meals, reinforcing bonds that had been neglected by the very people who were supposed to nurture them. The rose bushes she planted in front of her home were more than flowers. They were symbols of endurance, reminders that beauty could flourish even after being uprooted. She realized that she could craft her life not around resentment but around deliberate joy, slow victories, and quiet observation. Her son had assumed she would crumble, that her age would make her passive, and yet she had orchestrated every step with meticulous care, reclaiming her property, her finances, and her voice. The peace she now possessed was not only a reward but a message. Strength is cultivated in silence, and dignity is maintained through deliberate choice. Each sunrise she watched, each sip of tea, each gentle laugh shared with Tyler, reinforced the truth she had learned through hardship, that life's value is determined not by the recognition of others, but by the integrity and courage with which one navigates it. She understood now that forgiveness did not require reconciliation, and closure did not demand acknowledgement. It was a personal triumph she had earned, one that no one could take from her. There were moments when she saw her son through the window, standing frozen, realizing the consequences of his actions. Yet there was no satisfaction in humiliation, only quiet justice. Danielle's loud displays and passive aggression were met with calm observation, a demonstration that her life no longer required validation through revenge or theatrics. The community had witnessed the aftermath, and although whispers carried through the neighborhood, they were secondary to the internal peace she had cultivated. The legal victories, the control over her finances, and the protection of Tyler's future were milestones. But the most profound change was internal, a restoration of self-worth, confidence, and serenity. Her home, now filled with subtle laughter, creative pursuits, and quiet joy, contrasted sharply with the house she had left behind, once filled with tension and false appearances. Every act of normalcy, every daily routine, reinforced the idea that she had survived not through confrontation, but through careful planning and deliberate action. She had transformed pain into empowerment, betrayal into a lesson in self-determination, and isolation into intentional community. The meals shared with Tyler, the stories retold of her past sacrifices, and the moments spent cultivating her garden all became rituals of remembrance and restoration. Her grandson thrived in this environment, a living testament to the endurance of care and love even when others failed to recognize it. The quiet strength she now embodied was both a shield and a legacy, a living message that those who underestimate patience, resolve, and wisdom often miscalculate the depth of a lifetime of endurance. The nights were peaceful now, filled with the hum of crickets, the soft glow of porch lights, and the rhythmic chirping of distant birds, creating a soundtrack that contrasted sharply with the chaos and betrayal of the past. She often reflected on the lessons learned, the importance of vigilance, the necessity of self-advocacy, and the power of patience when facing deceit. Tyler's presence was grounding, a reminder that family could be rebuilt, love could be nurtured, and trust could be earned even after profound disappointment. Each day was intentional, from the arrangement of furniture to the cultivation of the garden, the careful selection of meals, and the small acts of kindness shared with neighbors. She had cultivated a life that was no longer reactive, no longer defined by the whims of others, and no longer constrained by fear or dependency. The roses continued to bloom, bright against the fence, and each blossom was a reflection of her resilience and deliberate triumph over neglect. She knew the importance of maintaining this equilibrium, balancing justice with compassion, vigilance with serenity, and remembrance with forward movement. Her own narrative was now firmly in her hands, crafted not through confrontation alone, but through a combination of wisdom, patience, and strategic action. The freedom she felt was tangible, manifesting in the laughter she shared with Tyler, the meals they prepared together, and the quiet evenings spent on the porch in reflective observation. She understood that her victory was not defined by humiliation of others, but by the reclamation of her agency, the protection of her legacy, and the cultivation of a life filled with meaning and dignity. This was her peace, her mastery, and her ultimate legacy, a life rebuilt on the foundation of self-respect and resilience, carefully curated to ensure that neither betrayal nor neglect would ever define her again. And in this quiet, deliberate life, she found that true power was not in vengeance, but in choice. The roses she planted were thriving, their petals catching the light, much like the new life she had grown from the ruins of neglect. Tyler's laughter echoed softly through the home, a reminder that the past had been endured, lessons had been learned, and the future was secure. She had faced betrayal, manipulation, and erasure, yet through deliberate patience and strategic action, she emerged not just intact but triumphant, embodying a living testament to endurance. Every decision she made, from reclaiming her property to protecting her grandson, reinforced the principles of self-respect, deliberate patience, and unshakable dignity. Her days were no longer defined by fear, resentment, or expectation of others, but by the measured, intentional construction of a life she truly owned. She had rewritten the ending of a story that others thought they controlled, asserting her presence, wisdom, and resilience in every quiet act. And while her son lingered in the shadows of his own choices, she flourished in the light of her restored life, fully aware that the deepest justice comes from living fully and authentically on one's own terms. Each evening, as she sipped her tea, tended the garden, or simply watched the world pass, she was reminded that peace reclaimed is the sweetest victory of all. She smiled, knowing that the story she had lived and crafted would endure, a testament to courage, patience, and the unbreakable spirit of a mother, a grandmother, and a woman who refused to be erased.